Hello everyone and welcome to SplitSecond. Following last week's Patron celebrations, this week we received Brother Calzone aka Pipo. He brought his Malcolm and Kediss combo deck. Baal is piloting Koll Fruity Pebbles, a list from Avaloon, Iraruel, kokuryuha, Sickrobot and Ulvala. Hélder put together an Illuna Food Chain list, and David brought Urza Poly Kraken to try out the fresh new addition to the list, brewed by Eisenherz, Keegan52, Sinivi and the UrzaServer. Pipo won the spell table roll and is going first. Unfortunately, he had to mulligan down to 6, keeping a Mana Confluence, Cavern of Souls and Barbarian Ring for lands, with a Dispel for interaction, Ophidian Eye for value or to combo with Niv Mizzet and Gilded Drake to steal some value creature or commander. He sent to the bottom Arcane Adaptation. Baal kept his first 7 with a Snow-Covered Plains, Flooded Strand and Battlefield Forge for lands, and was happy enough with Gamble to pivot his game plan. Crookshank Kobolds is one of the many creatures the deck uses to slingshot into Value Town. Conqueror's Flail seems to be the Grand Abolisher's weapon, right? And if it all turns south, he can rely on Wheel of Misfortune. Hélder also mulliganed down to 6, keeping his Scalding Tarn and Breeding Pool for lands, with a Sol Ring, Llanowar Elves and Elvish Spirit Guide for ramp, allowing him to do latest Dream play, Wheel of Fortune turn 1. He sent to the bottom his Gilded Drake. Lastly, David mulliganed once and found 2 snow-covered islands, Everflowing Challenge for ramp, Arkham's Astrolabe cantrips and becomes a Mox with Urza and either Spellbomb to bounce some pesky stacks in creatures. Mystic Study for card draw and Muddle the Mixture can be quite versatile in what it can be transmuted into. Ready for this match? Pipo starts the game with a Mana Confluence and a quite nicely top-decked Gamble. He tutors for a Jewel Lotus and randomly discards a Gilded Drake. He proceeds to cast the Jewel Lotus and follows it with Malcolm Keen Eye Navigator, ready to start generating value. Baal plays a Flooded Strand and cracks it for a Plateau. He also casts a Gamble, tutoring for a Skull Clamp and randomly discards Conqueror's Flail. He casts Crookshank Kobolds and passes. Hélder goes ahead, playing his Scalding Tarn and cracking it for a Volcanic Island. He exiles Elvish Spirit Guide to add green in order to cast his Sol Ring, and follows it with his turn 1 Wheel of Fortune. Everyone discards and draws 7, but Hélder is not finished just yet. He casts a Mana Crypt into a Mox Opal, and then he passes. David is a bit sad for this forced mulligan, but he still plays a Snow-Covered Island and casts a Lotus Petal before passing. Pipo plays a Volcanic Island and casts his other commander, Kediss, Emberclaw Familiar. He jumps to combat, attacking Baal for 2 with Malcolm, triggering them and Kediss as well, creating a total of 3 treasures. In his second main phase, he casts Ragavan and passes quite set up. Baal plays a Marsh Flats and cracks it for a Plains. He casts Oswald Fiddlebender and follows it with Memnite, hoping to get some goodies next turn. Hélder rolls and loses his first script roll. He plays a Bloodstained Mire and cracks it for a Taiga. Without better options, he casts his commander, Illuna Apex of Wishes, and passes. David is trying to recoup from this new hand. He does find a Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, but he is forced to pass. On Pipo's upkeep, he does pay for all 3 creatures to survive the Tabernacle triggers. He plays an island and keeps Punching Face, sending Malcolm at Baal once again and Kediss and Ragavan towards David. Ragavan, Malcolm and Kediss all trigger, pinging each opponent, and Malcolm then generates 3 treasures, counting only the damage from Kediss, as we forgot that Ragavan is also a pirate and would generate an extra treasure for 6 total, instead of the 5 added. Ragavan also reveals a Time Twister from David's deck. However, not only is Pipo happy with his hand, Twister is also a combo piece in Urza Twister loops, so he lets it in exile and passes. Baal untaps and pays for Memnite and Oswald to survive. He plays a Wooded Foothills, cracking it for a Sacred Foundry, taking 2 more. He then activates Oswald, sacrificing Memnite and searching for a Sol Ring into play, finishing his turn. Hélder now rolls and wins his crit roll. He pays to keep his dinosaur around. He then casts a Sylvan Tutor and searches for a Drift of Phantasms, as a way to search for his food chain, and passes the turn. David plays a Snow-Covered Island and casts a Sol Ring. Considering Hélder has just the right mana to go off the next turn in case he already has a Cast from Exile creature in hand, David goes for a Back to Basics. Pipo thinks for a bit but passes, and it resolves, so David also passes. Pipo untaps his island and pays for the Tabernacle triggers with the treasures. He plays another island and goes to combat with the same attacks as last turn, and everyone takes the damage, from Malcolm, Kediss and Ragavan, revealing a Pithing Needle, but Pipo decides not to cast it, as he's packing plenty of interaction at hand. He passes and Baal untaps and pays for the Tabernacle trigger. He plays a Mana Confluence and then casts a Goblin Recruiter, entering and triggering, and he searches for a Dockside Extortionist and a Goblin Welder to the top, passing afterwards. On his end step, however, Hélder fires a Cyclonic Rift at the Back to Basics and proceeds to his turn. He untaps, takes 3 from the crypt and pays for the Tabernacle trigger. He plays a basic forest and transmutes his Drift of Phantasms to search for a Food Chain, which he proceeds to cast. David passes priority, but Pipo responds with a Fierce Guardianship, effectively saving the table. Hélder has nothing on top to protect now, so he attacks Pipo for 6 and passes. David plays another snow-covered island and casts his commander, Urza Lord High Artificer. However, Pipo responds by exiling a Simian Spirit Guide for red and casts Red Elemental Blast on it, so David sadly passes. On his end step, however, Pipo casts a Pull from Tomorrow, X equals 5, drawing 5 and discarding a land. Pipo untaps and pays for the Tabernacle triggers. He draws and keeps up with his aggro plans, sending a creature at each opponent, and noticing now the Ragavan-Malcolm synergy. He gets 1 treasure from Malcolm hitting face, 2 damage at each other opponent from Kediss generates 2 more treasures. And Ragavan, being a pirate as well, generates 1 treasure from Malcolm and 1 from itself, and exiles Hélder's top card, a Simian Spirit Guide. In his second main phase, he casts a Land's Eye Diamond and plays a Lava Glide Pathway before passing. Baal taps and pays for the Tabernacle triggers. He plays a Scalding Tarn and then casts his commander, Koll the Forge Master. He is trying to set up for next turn, casting Goblin Welder and passing. Hélder is safe from the creep this time, and then pays for the Tabernacle trigger. His Food Chain into open mana was not nonsensical, as he now plays a command tower into his backup plan, Underworld Breach. However, Pipo has been drawing a lot of cards this game, so he responds with a Swan Song, shutting down Hélder's Food Chain Dreams. He then attacks Pipo back with Illuna and in his second main phase casts Squid the Immortal before passing. David is slowly trying to get into the game, being last in turn order. Back to basics is not an option for him now, as it would slowly give the game to Pipo, which can bypass it through all the treasures he's generating each turn. He casts Eye of Vecna, cantripping itself. He then casts a Mana Vault and follows it with his commander once again, in case he draws into a polymorph effect. It enters, creating a construct, and he passes. Pipo untaps and pays only for Malcolm's Tabernacle trigger, as there are now plenty of blockers. He starts with a cool looking Frantic Search, which he found directly from Gavin Verhey's Twitter challenge, spread around Seattle. He keeps digging with a Preordain, and he found what he was looking for, glint-horn Buccaneer, which, as he proceeds to combat, he can activate glint-horn to discard a card and draw a card, dealing 1 damage to each opponent, which triggers Malcolm to generate 3 treasures, enough to activate glint-horn over and over and pinging each opponent to death. GG. This was quite a short match, so he shuffled up for another one. This time Baal won the dice roll, and he mulliganed once, keeping a Plains, Battlefield Forge and Wooded Foothills for lands, with an Arcane Signet for ramp. Gamble an Enlightened Tutor to grab the rest of the combo pieces, having Mask of Immolation at hand already. Hélder mulliganed down to 6 again, keeping a Volcanic Island and Iron Mesa for lands, with a Mox Diamond and Birds of Paradise for ramp. This time he has the nerve to Wheel of Misfortune, and only available on turn 2. Maybe David will get to play stuff from his hand now. Survival of the Fittest can find him Timur Sabertooth's package, in case he can't find Food Chain, and he sent to the bottom an island. David mulliganed once and found quite a nice hand, with 2 snow-covered islands and a Jeweled Lotus, allowing for a turn 1 Urza. From there, he can slow the table with Winter Orb, while digging for outs with Preordain and Fabricate. Resculpt is versatile interaction. Lastly, Pipo mulliganed once as well, finding a Prismatic Vista and Flooded Strand for lands, with a Lotus Petal and Mana Vault for ramp, Brainstorm and Frantic Search to dig into his combo pieces, or Wheel of Fortune to do the same while disrupting any opponent's plans. Ready for game 2? Baal starts the game with the Wooded Foothills, cracking it for a plateau. He goes ahead and casts Gamble once again. He searches for a Mana Crypt and randomly discards Mask of Immolation. He then casts Mana Crypt and follows it with Arcane Signet, before passing. Hélder plays an Arid Mesa and casts Mox Diamond, discarding Volcanic Island. He casts Birds of Paradise and passes. David plays a snow-covered island and casts Jeweled Lotus, proceeding to cast his commander, Urza. In response, Baal casts his Enlightened Tutor, before David gets access to mana. He ponders on GT to keep Malcolm under control, but ends up tutoring for Fighter class, to keep his options open. Urza enters and creates a construct, which he taps to add blue to cast Preordain, and then passes. Pipo plays a Flooded Strand and cracks it for a Volcanic Island. He casts a Lotus Petal and follows it with a Mana Vault, allowing him to cast Malcolm turn 1 once again. Baal untaps and takes 3 from the Crypt. He plays a Flooded Strand and cracks it for a Snow-covered Plains. He does fear Hélder might go for a Wheel, but he needs to cast Koll first, so he can try to go for GT next turn, and tells Hélder he probably shouldn't Wheel. In his end step, Hélder cracks his Mesa for a tapped Stomping Ground. He gets to his turn and casts a Chrome Mox, imprinting a Survival of the Fittest. He also casts a Mox Opal, and his last card in hand is, indeed, a Wheel of Misfortune. Everyone votes and only David chooses 0, not drawing a new 7. Baal did vote high despite having fighter class in hand, as he had nothing else to rely on, and Pipo had quite some juicy cards as well. Hélder plays a Verdant Catacombs and cracks it for a tropical island, casting a Rhystic Study, which resolves and he passes. David gets to his turn, plays his snow-covered island and casts his Winter Orb, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. Pipo draws and takes 1 from the vault. He plays a Cavern of Souls, naming Pyrants. He then casts an uncounterable Dockside Extortionist, triggering Rhystic and unable to pay. He creates 8 treasures and then casts a Mystic Remora, triggering Rhystic and not paying. He still casts Jeska's Will, targeting Baal and this time paying for the Rhystic trigger. He gets 7 red mana and the top 3 cards are not so good, however. He does cast the Electrostactic Field, triggering and paying for the Rhystic, and follows it with Kediss, once again paying for the Rhystic trigger. Without much else to do, he jumps to combat, and sends Malcolm at David, triggering it and Kediss for 3 treasures before passing. Baal takes 3 from the crit again. He draws and plays a Spire of Industry. He casts Pure Steel Paladin, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. He then follows it with Springleaf Drum, triggering Rhystic and Remora and paying for none. He then passes. Hélder plays an untapped Breeding Pool, paying 2, and then casts his commander, Illuna. He follows it with a Sylvan Tutor, triggering Remora and unable to pay. He searches for Screed to the top and passes. In his end step, David taps Winter Orb with Urza in order to untap all his lands in his turn. He draws and simply passes, holding some interaction. Pipo pays for his Remora to stick and takes 1 from the mana vault. He plays a Misty Rainforest and cracks it for an untapped Steam Vents. He casts an Impulse, triggering Electrostatic Field and Rhystic, and he pays for it, and the field deals 1 damage to each opponent. He then casts an Arcane Adaptation, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. It enters and he chooses Pirates once again. He proceeds to combat, attacking David with Malcolm, triggering it and Kediss and creating 3 treasures before finishing his turn. Baal rolls and wins his script roll this time. He plays a Command Tower and starts with a Rite of Flame, triggering Rhystic and Remora and not paying. He then casts a Shatter Skull Smashing X = 6, dividing 4 damage at the Electrostatic Field and 2 damage at Malcolm, triggering Rhystic and Remora and not paying. Pipo, however, responds with an Opt, triggering Electrostatic Field and Rhystic and paying for it. And since Electrostatic Field is now a pirate as well, when it deals 1 damage to each opponent, it also creates 3 treasures from Malcolm. He now responds with a Flusterstorm, triggering Electrostatic Field and Rhystic and paying for it, but in response to the field's trigger, David casts a Resculpt, targeting Malcolm and triggering Remora and Rhystic, but not paying. In response, Pipo casts a Delay, triggering Electrostatic Field and Rhystic, and he can't pay this time. Electrostatic Field pings each opponent, creating 3 treasures from Malcolm and then another 3, and Baal finishes his turn. Hélder plays a Flooded Strand and cracks it for an untapped Steam Vents, paying 2. He goes ahead and casts his Food Chain, triggering Remora and not paying. However, Pipo responds with a Force of Negation, pitching a Rhystic Study, triggering Electrostatic Field and Rhystic, and he pays for it. In response to the field's trigger, Hélder fires a Fierce Guardianship, triggering Remora and unable to pay. Pipo still responds with an Intuition, targeting Baal, triggering Electrostatic Field and Rhystic, and he pays for it. However, still in response, Hélder casts a Miscast, triggering Remora and not paying. But this time, David is the one responding, with a Mental Misstep, triggering Remora and Rhystic and paying for the Rhystic only. Electrostatic Field now deals 3 damage and creates 3 treasures through Malcolm, and Intuition resolves, fetching a Dispel, Mana Drain and Fierce Guardianship, and Baal gives him Dispel, so he spends more mana on it as he casts it, triggering Electrostatic Field and Rhystic, and paying for it. Field pings his opponents and creates 3 more treasures, and Electrostatic Field's final trigger resolves for another 3 pings and treasures, and then Force of Negation finally exiles Food Chain, shattering Hélder's dreams of recurring it. He then casts an Elvish Mystic and follows it with a Wild Growth on his Steam Vents, triggering Remora and unable to pay. He still attacks Pipo with Illuna and passes. David gets to his turn and ponders deeply on his options. He casts a Mana Crypt, triggering Remora and Rhystic and not paying, and follows it with Fabricate, triggering Remora and Rhystic and not paying. The table discusses the odds of Pipo winning, and David goes for an Either Spell Bomb, to hopefully delay any Pipo's attempts at winning. He casts it, triggering Remora and Rhystic and not paying, finishing his turn. Pipo takes 1 from the vault and lets the Remora die, and instantly transmutes Muddled Mixture for an Underworld Breach, which he casts, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. In response to it, David cracks the Spellbomb to bounce Electrostatic Field to Pipo's hand, hoping to mess with his mana math. In response to it, Pipo casts a Mystical Tutor, triggering Electrostatic Field and Rhystic and not paying, hoping to generate some more mana through the field's pings and treasures. He searches for a mental misstep to the top, just in case, and then field is bounced and Underworld Breach resolves. He does recast Electrostatic Field, triggering Ristic and not paying. He proceeds to escape Lotus Petal and escapes Opt, triggering Electrostatic Field and Ristic, and he pays for it. He gets 3 more treasures and then escapes Intuition, triggering Electrostatic Field and Ristic, and he pays for it. And before he gets more treasures, David responds with a Muddle Mixture, triggering Ristic and unable to pay. However, Pipo still had his Dispel in the graveyard, which he escapes, triggering Electrostatic Field and Ristic and unable to pay. However, despite Hélder Drew interaction, he is tapped out, so the stack slowly resolves, creating some more treasures and resolving Intuition, finding Reckless Fireweaver, Preordain and Pact of Negation, and at this point there is no good option, so he's given the Reckless Fireweaver, which he proceeds to cast, triggering Ristic but paying for it, and because of Arcane Adaptation, Reckless Fireweaver is also a pirate. And the moment he casts an instant or sorcery spell, his Pirate Electrostatic Field will ping each opponent, triggering Malcolm to generate 3 treasures. That will trigger Pirate Reckless Fireweaver to ping each opponent and create 3 treasures, looping itself until all his opponents are dead. GG. Thank you for joining us for today's match, everyone. Turn 1 Malcolm in both games definitely set Pipo ahead resource-wise. While Urza's plans were mostly slacking his opponents, they mostly hindered Baal and Hélder, and the amount of cards drawn by Wheels and other effects like the Remora from Game 2 was the cherry on top of the cake, so Pipo ran away with both games. We'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons, and especially Izanagi, TJ Rap, Mike Purr, Ajimu, Drunken House Cat, V, RJ, Hitachill, Pina, Ricardo, Dragonstake, Katarina, Michael Bowen, Super Scaldi, Dog, Wyatt and Wicked, our new stack breaker. If you want to support us, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing or by becoming a patron yourself. If you want to go through other Commander adventures, click one of the videos on the right. If you want to talk with us about our games or other EDH related matters, join us on Discord. Join us again next week for a new set of Commanders and more decisive plays. See you all then.